The door wasn't forced. The windows weren't broken. Nothing inside the room suggested a struggle. But a 3-year-old child was no longer there. And the people responsible for her safety were only a short walk away. This wasn't a disappearance that unfolded in isolation. It didn't happen in a remote area. It didn't happen in the kind of place people associate with danger. It happened inside a holiday apartment, in a setting that felt controlled, familiar, routine. And that is what makes it difficult to explain. In May 2007, the McCann family traveled to Praia da Luz, a coastal town in southern Portugal. It was the kind of destination families choose for quiet vacations, resorts, restaurants, predictable evenings. Each night followed a pattern. Dinner was held at a tapas restaurant within the resort complex. The adults would sit together. The children would be left asleep in nearby apartments. At intervals, the parents returned to check on them. It was a system built on proximity and trust. Nothing about it seemed unusual, at least not at the time. Among the children asleep that night was Madeleine McCann, 3 years old, British, on holiday with her parents and younger siblings. By all accounts, she was where she was supposed to be, in bed, inside a locked environment, surrounded by adults who believed they were close enough to respond if anything changed. At approximately 10 p.m., her mother, Kate McCann, returned to the apartment to carry out a routine check. The door was more open than expected. Inside, the room felt different, unnaturally so. She approached the bed, and then stopped. Madeleine was gone. The blankets were disturbed. The window in the room was open. But there were no signs of forced entry, no indication of a struggle. No sound had been reported. Nothing that clearly explained what had just happened. Within minutes, the situation escalated. Searches began inside the apartment, then outside. Voices calling her name, footsteps moving through dimly lit pathways, doors opening, lights turning on. But the search produced no immediate result. According to reporting by news outlets, early efforts to locate Madeleine that night yielded no confirmed sightings. And that absence of evidence would become one of the defining features of the case. Because almost immediately, the situation raised a set of problems. If someone had entered the apartment, how do they gain entrance? There were no clear signs of forced access. If someone had left carrying a child, why had no one seen them? The surrounding area was not empty. Other guests were present. Staff moved through the resort. Lights were on. And yet, nothing unusual had been reported at the exact moment it mattered. The system of checking on the children, intended to reduce risk, introduced a complication. There were gaps. Short windows of time where no adult was inside the apartment. Individually, those gaps seemed insignificant. But collectively, they created opportunity. Investigators began to focus less on the disappearance itself and more on what happened in the minutes leading up to it. Because the critical question shifted. Not just, what happened to Madeleine? But, when exactly did it happen? And more importantly, who knew that window existed? If someone had been watching the routine, they would have seen the pattern. Who left the table? Who returned? How often? They would have known when the apartment was unoccupied. Not for long, but long enough. Several theories emerged over time. The most widely discussed was abduction. A person entering the apartment during one of those gaps and leaving before anyone noticed. But that theory carried its own difficulty. There was no definitive physical evidence tying a specific individual to the act. Another line of thought suggested the possibility of an internal miscalculation, a chain of events misunderstood in the moment. But again, no conclusive evidence supported a single explanation. Years later, the case remains unresolved. And despite extensive investigation, including international cooperation, no definitive account has been established. At its center, the case continues to return to the same problem. How does a child disappear? From inside a room, without a clear trace of how it happened? No confirmed entry, no confirmed exit. Only a narrow window, and a sequence of events that does not fully align. The bed remained. The room remained. Nothing appeared damaged. Nothing appeared disturbed in a way that told a clear story. Except for the absence. Madeleine McCann was 3 years old. She was put to bed that night. And somewhere between routine checks and ordinary moments, that certainty ended. What unsettles people about this case is not only the disappearance itself but the setting. A place that felt safe. A system that felt controlled. And a moment that passed. without resistance, without noise, without interruption. Because if something like this can happen within a routine that appears stable, then the question extends beyond a single case. It becomes broader. How many moments do we pass through, without questioning them? Moments that appear ordinary until they are not. This is Real Echoes of Reality, where the stories are real, but the truth is never complete. If you're paying attention to the details others overlook, subscribe. And tell me, what do you think happened in those missing minutes?